the Ruh-Self. He wondered if it might be possible that his Ruh spirit had slipped over somehow into the world where the Fremen believed he had his true existence, into the Alam Al-Mithal, the world of similitudes, that metaphysical realm where all physical limitations were removed. And he knew fear at the thought of such a place, because removal of all limitations meant removal of all points of reference. In the landscape of a myth, he could not orient himself and say, "I am because I am here." Musings of Paul Muad'Dib. Part of me dwells forever underground without thought. That part reacts. It does things without a care for knowing or logic. Leto II, God Emperor of DUNE. Though DUNE is often cited as one of the first novels to treat environmentalism as a major theme, it is also in large part a book about the role of religion and of the transcendent or mystical experience in human affairs. Yet theological discussions on the nature or motivation of God are notably sparse throughout the DUNE series. In the third appendix of DUNE, we read of an effort to consolidate mankind's religious traditions around the conviction that, quote, "there exists a divine essence in the universe," unquote, but the nature of this essence is left undefined. This effort to rationalize religion was one of the results of the Butlerian Jihad, the generational war against anything that might, quote, "disfigure the human soul." To use the language of the Commission of Ecumenical Translators, a gathering of religious leaders united in the belief that, quote, "man may not be replaced." The Council's main purpose was to assimilate the significance of the Butlerian Jihad, as well as the psychological dislocation to mankind from the rise of long-range space travel. The Jihad had forced humanity to come to grips with what was unique and precious about itself once again. The Council recognized that reducing humans to cogs in a machine is in the end nihilistic, particularly in an age when so many possibilities lie open to us. If human beings do not matter, then nothing matters, and therefore, what's the point of working towards a better future, or of maintaining civilization? The result was the Orange Catholic Bible, a text that would prove to be almost as divisive as it was unifying. The OC Bible, along with other religious influences including the Bene Gesserit, the mystique of aristocracy, and the various faiths of old Earth, formed the core religious background of the Imperium at the time when Paul Muad'Dib emerged from the deserts of Arrakis. The absence of a specified deity or god in the DUNE universe is in part a reflection of the ruling class's cynicism, as the elite tended to view religion as a political tool for controlling the masses. The commoners, referred to as pions or serfs of the Imperium, on the other hand, tended towards superstitious belief and ritualistic practice, granting this otherwise powerless underclass some sense of meaning and control in their lives. And yet, there is a deep sense of the transcendent running through the entire DUNE narrative. As Paul undergoes his transformation, a picture emerges of a magical universe, infinite in its potential, that forever challenges mankind to break beyond self-limiting systems and beliefs. In the third appendix of DUNE, we read, "When Paul Muad'Dib stood with his right hand on the rock shrine enclosing his father's skull, he quoted word for word from Bamoko's legacy. 'You who have defeated us say to yourselves that Babylon is fallen, and its works have been overturned. I say to you still that man remains on trial, each man in his own dock. Each man is a little war.' The Fremen said of Muad'Dib that he rode one day there to the land of the Ruh spirits, the Alam Al-Mithal, where all limitations are removed." Throughout DUNE, Herbert refers to the Alam Al-Mithal, a realm of shifting symbols and dreams, of chaotic movement and creation. It is a reference to the unconscious or pre-conscious understanding of the world of the infant human, or perhaps of our pre-conscious ancestor species. A place of danger, of adventure, and of surprise. To function in such a place, the human mind must construct something fixed and stable. Digging deeper, we read,
"Forces that we cannot understand permeate our universe. We see the shadows of those forces when they are projected upon a screen available to our senses, but understand them we do not. Our universe is magical. All arbitrary forms are transient and subject to magical changes. Science has led us to this interpretation as though it placed us on a track from which we cannot deviate." From the Atreides Manifesto.
Herbert makes reference to a screen, which acts as a reference point, allowing us to make sense of the chaos of change that is all around us. This is the conscious mind attempting to grapple with that which it experiences. But this unconscious screen is partly arbitrary, and we do not really understand what is going on behind it. According to the author of this tract, the Reverend Mother Darwi Orade, it is science itself, through the discovery of relativity and quantum mechanics, that has led us to this awareness. In a Bene Gesserit report, the Mother Superior, Alma Mavis Taraza, writes,
"At the quantum level, our universe can be seen as an indeterminate place, predictable in a statistical way only when you employ large enough numbers. Between that universe and a relatively predictable one, where the passage of a single planet can be timed to a picosecond, other forces come into play for the in-between universe where we find our daily lives. If enough of us believe, a new thing can be made to exist. Belief structure creates a filter through which chaos is sifted into order."
Herbert is saying that, between the apparent chaos that rules us at the levels of the exceptionally large and the very small, and the Newtonian world of perfect order, where the universe behaves like clockwork, is the human world, which is in large part determined by our beliefs. That is to say, how we interpret what our senses are telling us. Indeed, the world we experience may have much more to do with our beliefs than with physical reality itself. Therefore, the degree to which our beliefs allow us to unlock the potential of reality is the degree to which we will flourish as a species. Recalling his Zen Sunni training, the Bashar Mentat Miles Tegh reflects, "By your belief in granular singularities, you deny all movement, evolutionary or devolutionary. Belief fixes a granular universe and causes that universe to persist. Nothing can be allowed to change, because that way your non-moving universe vanishes. But it moves of itself when you do not move. It evolves beyond you and is no longer accessible to you." According to Herbert, then, the greatest danger for humanity is the tendency to confuse the framework with reality. In a universe of constant flux, whose movements we barely comprehend, it is natural to mistake the framework for the reality that it is framing. But that can have dire consequences, especially over the long term. While recovering in his Fremen lair, Paul muses, "The parallel between the Ruh-Self and the Kwisatz Haderach is readily seen. The Kwisatz Haderach that the Sisterhood sought through its breeding program was interpreted as the shortening of the way, or the one who can be two places simultaneously. But both of these interpretations can be shown to stem directly from the commentaries. When law and religious duty are one, your selfdom encloses the universe. For social order to exist, men must at times bind their thinking to unchanging rules. But this comes at a price, as there will always be times when reality does not fit neatly into our rulebook, and the mere existence of rulebooks tempts the unscrupulous to abuse them. Rules also lead to injustice, and the accumulation of such injustices is destabilizing in the long run. Any structure built with inherent instabilities must be carefully maintained and revised over time, or it will eventually collapse. In a chaotic universe, humans must create a mental structure or grid in order to make sense of the world, in order to make it logical. Humanity has been engaged in this process since the beginning, indeed since before the advent of language, and the record of that process is embedded in our culture and encoded in our genes. A landscape of dreams. So, how do we humans construct this framework or grid out of which order emerges? It begins as an unconscious pre-verbal process. The Alam Al-Mithal is the world as apprehended by the pre-rational, pre-linguistic human mind, the mind as it is in early childhood, assembling useful knowledge out of experience, or the mind of our hominid ancestors, Homo erectus perhaps, before the advent of modern language. Here, there are no specifics, only generalities, no objects, only shifting forms, no direction or time, as everything is in flux and nothing is fixed. According to Muad'Dib, only similitudes exist here, which may be translated as models, templates, or even the Jungian term, archetypes. As the Duncan Idaho Gola describes it in Dune Messiah, it is where all possible futures exist. Herbert's Alam Al-Mithal also bears a close resemblance to Carl Jung's concept of the unconscious, a reservoir of ancestral memories in the form of archetypes and symbolic representations that charge certain of our real-world experiences with meaning. In his 2017 lecture series, Personality and Its Transformations, psychoanalyst Jordan Peterson discusses cognitive development in early childhood. The infant begins to define itself and elaborate its personality by building up a picture of how the world works and its situation within it. We co-create ourselves and each other as we grow, giving tangible substance to the world of our experience by categorizing objects and events. But how do we know what to look for? We know because we are orientated around our own selves, the locus of our thoughts and feelings, and from there we reach out to find key information based on implicit structures that reside within us, in a cognitive space analogous to the Alam Al-Mithal. According to Peterson, the emerging personality is concerned with knowing how to act in the world and in society in a manner that will allow it to survive and flourish. Its search for answers originates in part in its deep programming, the fluid archetypes already present within its cognitive apparatus. They are encoded in our genes and speak to us from the distant past, which explains why certain myths and story patterns are found across all times and all cultures with remarkable consistency. The pre-conscious part of us, the Ruh-Self of DUNE, experiences the world in those terms, and it is from this experience that our conscious self emerges, creating our subjective realities by comparing our experiences against the archetypes, looking for matches and approximations that we may gain some guidance on how to respond. Humans are not born with complete knowledge or understanding of the world, and because total knowledge is not possible, we must assemble and rely on a working model of reality, including the laws of nature and the laws of the society we inhabit, to function properly and survive. The programming that tells us how to assemble our understanding of the chaotic outer world is innate, but it is written in the language of symbols. It is written in the Alam Al-Mithal and directly accessible only to our Ruh selves. A world in flux. Another way of thinking about the Alam Al-Mithal is as a reflection of the universe as it is, rather than how we experience it. To us, objects seem fixed, systems seem constant, processes seem unending. We even have a sense of permanence toward the social and technical structures within which we live. But not only is the world and everything in it temporary, it is actually changing right before our eyes, and we often fail to notice it. Or rather, we fail to notice its import. The blind spot in our quote, Western unquote worldview is something Herbert addresses in several of his non-fiction articles. In a piece entitled Science Fiction in a World in Crisis, he writes, "You see it all around in crisis after crisis, how deeply we remain immersed in the Cartesian division between material and mental. It is virtually impossible for anyone conditioned in a Western culture to think with any empirical directness about infinity, about a universe without beginnings and without end. A universe of continual temporary conditions, one merging into another forever." And in an interview with Tim O'Reilly and Willis McNally, Herbert says, "Western man has assumed that all you need for any problem is enough force, and that there is no problem which won't submit to this approach, even the problem of our own ignorance. This assumption is the basic fallacy of Western man's approach to living. The idea that, for all of its mastery over the physical world and the world of technical innovation, there is something out of balance in Western culture appears throughout DUNE, and is the core of the ecological motif that runs throughout the book. In God Emperor of DUNE, Leto II likens it to an inability to think in the long term.
For what do you hunger, Lord?
Mineo ventured. For a humankind which can make truly long-term decisions. Do you know the key to that ability, Mineo?
You have said it many times, Lord. It is the ability to change your mind.
Change, yes. And do you know what I mean by long-term?
For you, it must be measured in millennia, Lord.
Mineo, even my thousands of years are but a puny blip against infinity. In the view of infinity, any defined long-term is short-term.
Then there are no rules at all, Lord?
Perhaps one. Short-term decisions tend to fail in the long term. Herbert is saying that in a universe of change, we need to be prepared to continually adjust and refine existing systems on short notice, to trim away that which has grown dysfunctional, to account for the tendency that systems have of taking on a life of their own. As Herbert wrote in The Sparks Have Flown, it's the systems themselves that I see as dangerous. Systems originate with human creators, with people who employ them. Systems take over and grind on and on. They are like a flood tide that picks up everything in its path. Herbert goes on to argue that this tendency to focus on objects rather than on processes, to be blind to the world of the Ruh-Self, can be a source of danger. We build what we think are permanent solutions and move on, seemingly unaware that it is only a temporary fix and is already setting up the conditions for the next crisis. He goes on to say, "The basis for today's world planning concepts remains firmly seated in a commitment to absolute goals, political and physical. The holders of power in this world have not awakened to the realization that there is no single model of a society, a species, or an individual. There are a variety of models to meet a variety of needs. They meet different expectations and have different goals. The aim of that force which impels us to live may be to produce as many different models as possible. This point is closely echoed by Howard Bloom's model of the complex adaptive system that we explained in Chapter 1. If one views human society as an adaptive network, one can recognize the value of continuous probing at the edge of the unknown, as civilization seeks out new possibilities, eliminating malfunctioning nodes and correcting for changes in the environment. Herbert goes on to say, against a backdrop of false absolutes, we reduce the variables that we permit in our societies, in our individuals, and in our possessions. By our acts, we demonstrate that we want mass production of a standard human who employs standardized consumer goods. We execute this mass production of sameness in largely unexamined, unconscious manner. But nature constantly evolves, trying out its new arrangements, its new kinds of life, its differences, its crises. Against such movement, we attempt our balancing acts, our small sallies at equilibrium. In the dynamic interrelationships of the universe around us, we look for models upon which to pattern our lives, but that universe greets us with complexities everywhere we turn. Herbert is warding us away from our lazy habits of short-term thinking and conviction that we can always force things to work. He is instead enjoining us to flow, to grapple with the longer term, to engage with the problems that we encounter, rather than allow mindless systems to stumble along, growing more and more remote from us and from the world around them.